For the most part this season, the Championship has been pretty terrible across the board, but what this means is that there's a really exciting relegation battle on the cards come the start of next year onwards. So I'm going to sort of give you my early predictions of who I think goes down from the Championship. This is obviously just my opinion, but where I think the cut-off is from teams in a relegation battle or are going to be in a relegation battle this season, sort of Luton down, sort of 8, yeah. I think Preston will be fine, Derby will be alright. Even if they're out of form, I think they'll be alright. Their home record will come back at some point and they'll get enough points. I think they'll get enough points anyway. So you're looking at sort of Luton down. And we'll start with Luton actually, because they've had a really disappointing season. I mean, I would have had them to get promoted if I'd made a predictions video. I'm sure many others would. Obviously coming down from the Premier League, and they were the best side out of the 3 that came down. You know, they finished with the most points. Defensively, they were good. I mean, they had a lot of injuries now and when they were in the Premier League, but you know, they gave a really good account of themselves in this league, and it makes you wonder how they're struggling in this division. I think the problem for Luton this season has been consistency, and I mean that in terms of the lineup of the side. They've had so many different centre backs, so many different strike pair partnerships, and you know, you need consistency. You know, Rob Edwards doesn't know his best 11 yet, maybe out of the players as he got now. I mean, he's brought a lot of young players through, and he has a lot of that squad that existed from the Premier League. I know they lost Ogbene to Ipswich, and they lost a few other players as well. But on the whole, they've got their core squad from the Premier League, Kaminsky in goal. A lot of their defenders were there last year. Marvellous to Canberra in midfield next to Jordan Clark. They didn't lose Ross Barkley, but the spine of their team is still what it was in the Premier League for the most part. So what is the problem? I mean, as I said, defensively they've been inconsistent in terms of who they've lined up, and they've been unlucky with Anderson getting injured, and obviously Tom Lockyer. That would never happen to any other club player ever. So really unfortunate for him. Hopefully he's back soon in some capacity. But I mean, McGuinness was signed from Cardiff for like 10.5 million or something. He's been pretty average. I mean, 6.6 average rating. 6.6 average rating. I just really don't think that's the best buy that Luton who have been usually quite smart in their business, and that's what they spend pretty much their budget from the Premier League on. But you know, Adebayo and Morris haven't been up to it. Morris's overall play has been fine. I don't think he scored as many goals as he would have liked to, but I think his overall play is fine. I think he's doing well there. Adebayo looks like he's on ice most of the time. He had a good season in the Premier League. I don't know what's happened to him, but he had that run of games where, God, he was just awful. It was like watching God knows who up front. Yeah, he was pretty terrible in those games. I mean, he's got 4 goals, same as Morris, but as I said, Morris's overall play is better, and that's maybe demonstrated by the fact that he's got an assist. But, you know, they need those two firing. That's a good Championship pairing up front. I mean, you compare that to even some sides in the Premier League, that is a good front two to have. And they should be utilising them way more than they are, but they just don't seem to work. I mean, the big talking point with Luton is obviously Rob Edwards, and you know, that sort of hero of that club slowly becoming a bit of a villain for it, and you know, he's been booed by the crowd. So I really hope for his sake that they manage to turn it around. I don't think Luton get relegated purely because I think it would be a catastrophe if they did. I mean, they've got those plans for that 25,000 seater stadium. They don't want to be in League One for that. Trust the MK Dons fan. You don't want a massive stadium in League One and League Two. So they will really be hoping that they can stay up. And I think they will. I think they have the players to do it, and they have the manager to do it. I mean, if they sack Rob Edwards, maybe a bit of a dip in form, or it can work the other way. You don't know, do you? So I think Luton will be fine. I think, as I said, I think they'll be fine because it would be terrible if they weren't fine. But I do genuinely think they'll be all right this season. I think there's at least 3 teams worse than them. Moving on to Oxford. Now, Oxford, for me, were the best promoted side into the division this season. The business they did, on top of the squad they already had, and their start to the season were all very promising. But we've all seen a dip in their form, and obviously a lot of injuries, in particular to their midfield. Brannigan is so key for them, and he missed from the 31st of August to the 14th of September, and then he missed from the 14th of September, not making his return until Middlesbrough on the 23rd of November. So they've really missed him, and he's such a key player for them. How they kept him on the contract at Oxford, I don't know. But yeah, he's so key to them with Volks next to him. The squad's still okay. Striker's obviously the issue in terms of they're not scoring enough goals. I mean, not scoring enough goals and conceding far too many. In their last 3 games, they've conceded 10 goals and scored 3. So at that rate, you're not going to stay in this division. But in terms of actual form, I mean, the game against Plymouth at the weekend, that would have been a massive game for them, was postponed. So in their last 10 games, they've won 1 against Hull, who are bottom, who we'll talk about in a bit. And even beyond 10 games, the last win was on the 14th of September, so the last game that Cameron Brannigan was available for before he got injured. They won 1-0 against Stoke. And since that, they've had 1 win in coming up to 3 months. So they really need to turn it around, Oxford. And the thing with Oxford is that they're not like Luton, where it's not like an absolute catastrophe if they go down. It is for the club, but it isn't from the wider world of football. If the promoted sides go down, you're just like, all right, you know, it's not a massive shock to anyone. It'd be a shock for Luton to go down back to back. So Oxford needs to sort of watch out a bit. They're not home and dry yet. They've got a really big game in the week against QPR. We're getting on to QPR in just a second. But yeah, they really need to start picking up games. They need to sort the goal scoring out, whether that's a January job. They did spend a lot of money in the summer and got some good players in, especially in the attacking areas with Sariq Dembele, who I suppose is injured because he hasn't been playing. Yeah, they really need to sort scoring goals and then stopping goals at the other end. Conceding 6 against Middlesbrough isn't even that bad in the grand scheme of things. Middlesbrough have been tearing teams apart now for weeks, and so I don't think they should focus on that too much. But in terms of, at the end of the day, you need to score goals to stay in this league. You get a good number 9 that's going to score you 15, 20 goals, you're going to stay up. Everything else will sort of coincide with that. If you have a good striker, the rest of your team tends to look better. So perhaps that's what Oxford need in the summer if Dane Scarlett isn't up to it. Moving on to Queen's Park Rangers. Now, QPR for me, out of these 6 teams that I'm going to talk about, is probably in the best position. Maybe bar Portsmouth. We'll get on to them in a minute. But QPR for me, their performances have been okay. All season, they've been all right. You know, they've had some tough days against Middlesbrough, who, again, as I said, conceding loads against Middlesbrough isn't that bad. But since their game against Coventry here, they've only lost 2 games, and they were against Leeds and Middlesbrough, who are both in the top 6. And they've got some good draws. They're keeping clean sheets, even with their best defender, in my opinion at least, Jake Clark-Salter. He's out injured, and they're still keeping clean sheets. Morrison's coming in and doing a good job. I think he's from Bayern Munich or something. Yeah. Bayern Munich, Wigan and QPR. That's some career path so far for the Scot. But yeah, no, he's done really well coming in for Jake Clark-Salter, next to Steve Cook, who's the captain now at QPR. But injuries have been a real problem for them this season. Chair, who's probably one of their best players, has been out for the majority of the season. Karamoko Dembele, who started the season really well, he's also injured for, I think, months rather than weeks, which is really unfortunate for them. So they've had to rely a lot on teenage talent and academy players as well. People like Kieran Morgan and Ryan Colley at the weekend have really come into the fray for them and done really well. Well, excuse the pun, Michael Fraser's out injured as well. But yeah, I mean, the young players have done really well for QPR so far this season, and then they'll need to use them. They'll need to rely on these young players to keep them in this division. But as I said before, I think they're in the best place out of all the teams. Their squad isn't great. They need a striker. I mean, if Colley can be that number 9 for them, then that's great. But Sanselar, his overall game's getting better, but it took him 20 league games to score a goal at Cardiff, and he hasn't scored one since then. It's not like he's been firing. So he needs to sort of, if he's not going to score goals, how are you going to use him as more of like a hold-up striker? He's quite small, but maybe he can do that job. I don't know. You've got to find a different role for him until you can either bring someone else in January or use Ryan Colley or Michael Frame when he gets back from injury and hope he stays fit. Koki Saito I've been really impressed with on the wing. Paul Smith, League One player really, but you know, they've got players in this side that are all right. They've got the QPR squad is all right. They haven't got like a standout player. Maybe Chair, maybe Dembele, but they're out injured. It's not like Oxford, where these players come out, like Cameron Brannigan will come out from Oxford and they'll immediately dip in form because they're not the same team without him. QPR, I feel, don't have anyone like that. I mean, there's freak incidents of like maybe the goalkeeper gets injured or something, but other than that they have players that can play every position, and they've got teenagers in their starting 11 that don't really affect how they play. They've been pretty, as I said, the performances this season have been okay on the whole. They've had a few off days, but considering the amount of injuries that they've had and how many young players they've had to use, how many squad players they've had to use week in, week out, players that maybe aren't good enough for the league, aren't good enough for the team, you know, with a fully fit squad. I think QPR are safe this season on the whole. I mean, as I said before, there's 3 teams that are going to be worse than QPR. I think Oxford are worse than QPR. Big game on Wednesday night. I mean, I made this video, might just go out before it, but if QPR can get a result in that game, then they're well on course to stay up this season. Cardiff City have finally made Omar Reza their permanent manager. Now he did really well for a spell. They've had a bit of a dip in form. They lost to QPR. Due with Coventry, which new manager bounced under Frank Lampard, so that's going to be a tough game. But Cardiff are a funny one for me. I mean, they're not really scoring any goals. I mean, how many goals they've scored? They've 17 goals, which I know is one less than QPR, and I didn't really talk about goals at QPR. But they've only scored 17 and they've conceded 28. QPR have got at least some clean sheets to their name. But we're talking about Cardiff anyway. So nothing in this squad particularly inspires me. Just nothing. I mean, Robinson's okay, a half a decent season West Brom a few years ago. It's Robertson in midfield, relatively young guy. Permanent actually from Man City. I thought it was on loan, but he looks okay. Still got Aaron Ramsey. They've got good players on paper and the team sort of big names, if you like. Even like Chris Willock is a big name in the Championship, and he's just not been performing for them. Cardiff for me are one of the first teams where they're almost nailed on. I'll explain why in a bit, but I think they are really going to struggle this season. 9 losses, which is the joint second most in the league. I think Cardiff will struggle. I haven't gone into too much detail. I haven't watched much of Cardiff this season, to be perfectly honest. But from when I have watched them, as I said, they don't really have much of a goal threat. But as I've said, they've had injury problems as well. I mean, the goalkeeper even has been out injured. Ethan Horvath is injured currently. So, yeah, it's going to be a struggle for Cardiff this season. But at least they've got some stability in the club now. They've signed on that manager, finally, permanently. So hopefully for them, they can stay up this season. Next up, Rooney's Greens. Now, Plymouth are so inconsistent. I mean, they can go and batter someone, play really well. They can go nick a late point, nick a late win. You feel that they can do a lot, but the last 2 games have just been absolutely horrendous. I mean, 6-1 to Norwich, who got beat 3-0 by QPR at the weekend, by the way. And then 4-0 to Bristol City, who, again, lost 3-0 to a relegation side at the weekend. Plymouth, for me, are on another level. I mean, again, injuries are such a problem. Morgan Whittaker out. Joe Edwards, who's your captain, hamstring injury, out till January. Sissoko, out till late January. He was really good at the start of the season for them. He was a game changer, really, for them. I never like blaming on injuries too much because, as we've seen and as we talked about, every club struggles with injuries all the time. So you can't just blame it on injuries, but I think Plymouth are nailed on to go down, unfortunately. I think they're just going to have too many injuries. And it's like remember when Pedro Neto was at Wolves. This is a really weird segue. You remember when Pedro Neto was at Wolves and they kept forcing him back too early, which is why he's got injured. But now he's at Chelsea and they don't depend on him as much. He sort of stayed fit. Morgan Whittaker, I can see that happening at Plymouth. I can see him just being forced back too early because they're in a relegation dogfight, and Rooney's like, right, we need to get our best players back as quick as possible. He's just going to get injured again and again and again, and it will affect his career, but more importantly for Plymouth, it will affect them this season. Plymouth going down would be a bit of a nightmare for them, you'd feel. I don't feel like League One's a horrible league to get stuck in anyway, but I don't feel like Plymouth can go back up with any sort of momentum. It would be a change of manager, change of squad completely. So it's really important that they stay up. But for me, they're one of the ones that go down. So far we have Cardiff and Plymouth to go down, and there's one more spot and 2 more teams to talk about. Next we have Plymouth. Now, Colby Bishop is back for Plymouth, which is massive for them in this fight. And you might have noticed that there's 2 teams left, but I've only got 1 spot left. to be relegated, and these are the bottom two. So you might be thinking, hang on, what's going on here? You know, what's he talking about, basically. But I've seen Portsmouth in the flesh this season. I've seen Plymouth as well. They played against us in pre-season, and they didn't look great then, but Colby Bishop is just massive for them. As I said so many times, having a number 9 makes your whole team look so much better. Everyone else starts playing because you know, Bishop starts scoring goals, and then the wingers will give him the ball, so the wingers will start getting assists, and it builds up from the back, and everything just looks so much better when you've got a number 9 scoring goals, and that's exactly what Colby Bishop can be for Portsmouth this season. They've not rushed him in, they've been careful with him, but he's here and he's scoring goals. So I can see Portsmouth having a real lift. Sort of Christmas period is big for them. If they can pick up a few wins here and there, they had a great result at the weekend, 3-0 to Bristol City. But if they can start picking up some points across the Christmas period, sort of get out of that relegation zone come January, have a decent January window, because they didn't have a very good summer window, to be honest with you. Have a decent January window, build up a bit of a squad, and then really push on for the rest of the season. I can see them staying up quite easily. They've got Josh Murphy, who's a brilliant player, even for championship level. Yeah, as I said, like everybody else, they've had their injury problems, but I think they've dealt with them all right. I mean, Pax had to slot in at centre-back, I know, but as I said, it's important for them to improve their squad in January, because they have got a few injuries, particularly in defence. Bowett, Shaughnessy, Jordan Williams as well. So quite a few injuries in those roles. So either hope that they come back first, hopefully they come back soon, or perhaps strengthen in January in those positions. And I think Portsmouth will be alright. I think they'll stay up. Hull next. Hull, my final team that I'm going to be talking about in this video. Bottom of the league, but it's not as easy as that. They've just brought in Ruben Sellers, who did wonders for Reading in League One. I mean, how they're in the top 6 with all the stuff that's going on off the pitch, it's just a brilliant achievement for him, and he's been rewarded by getting a championship role. Now, Hull are a weird one. Hull should not be this low in the league, but they just look rubbish. Like, every time I've seen them, I think they beat Coventry like 3-1 or something, and I remember watching and just thinking, God, how do they win that? How do they score 3 goals in that game? Granted, I think it was a penalty and a bit of another dodgy goal. It was a while ago. But I feel like I'm repeating myself a little bit. But they're not scoring enough goals. 17 goals is not enough goals for 19 games. 6 losses on the bounce to them as well. Yeah, Ruben Sellers has a job on his hands. The championship this season overall has been pretty terrible. There are lots of teams in this league that at home you can beat. As in your home, at Hull's home ground, you think they can beat a lot of these sides in this league, bar the top 5 or 6. So yeah, it's difficult to talk about Hull at the moment. You think they'll be all right. New manager bounce over the Christmas period. Get some money in January, because they must have some money lying around Hull somewhere, even though they spent all that money on loans last season just to not go up or even get the playoffs. But you'd think Hull will be all right. So in terms of my predictions for who goes down, I think it's going to be Plymouth will probably finish bottom. Cardiff will be in there as well. I think Oxford sneak in. I know that's really harsh, but it would need significant investment in January, and their best players like Brannigan staying fit to make me think that they'll stay up in this league. But it's difficult to think who would go down if Oxford were to stay up. It's very early in the season still. There might be loads of different changes. You know, Stoke are in 15th on 21 points. Maybe they get caught into it. Who knows? But I suppose we'll see come the end of the season. Anyway, thank you for watching. This has been The Woodwork. Let me know in the comments down below who you think is going down in the championship.